Jessie had no idea her quiet Saturday morning would spiral into a mystery straight out of a thriller. Before we continue, please take some time to subscribe to Daily Dose, like, and share this video. She was still groggy, padding across the kitchen for her first cup of coffee, when the doorbell rang a rare sound at such an early hour. Curiously, she opened the front door to find no one there, just a large, worn-out cardboard box resting on her porch. Across it, one word was scribbled in thick black marker: inheritance. Her heart skipped. She hadn't expected anything. Certainly not this. She looked around. No car. No delivery van. No footsteps. Just silence. Hesitantly, she lifted the box and carried it into the kitchen, placing it gently on the counter. The old tape barely held it shut. As she pulled it open, a wave of musky, attic-like smell hit her nose. Inside were photographs-faded snapshots of her grandmother and jewelry she'd never seen before, but it was the large porcelain doll nestled between the mementos that stopped Jessie cold. She knew that doll. Jessie remembered seeing it as a child at her grandmother's house, always tucked away, always untouchable. Her grandmother had been oddly protective of Itangri even whenever Jessie reached for it. That memory echoed now as Jessie stared at it, her fingers trembling slightly. Why would her grandmother, of all things, leave her this? Still, curiosity won. She reached out and picked it up. The musty scent was strongest on the doll, and its glassy eyes looked just as unsettling as they had all those years ago. "Smells just like Grandma's attic," Jessie murmured with a nervous smile, but the moment of nostalgia ended abruptly. The doll's leg twitched in her hand. At first, Jessie thought she was imagining it, maybe her fingers had moved. But then it happened again. The leg writhed, not smoothly, but in a jerky, unnatural way. Jessie gasped, stumbling backward and dropping the doll to the tiled floor with a loud clack. She stared in horror as the doll twitched again, almost crawling toward her across the tiles. Her breath caught. It looked possessed. Panic surged. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands and called 911. When the officer picked up, Jessie's voice cracked as she explained everything: the mystery box, the doll, the movement. To her relief, the officer took her seriously. He invited her to bring everything to the station so they could inspect it together. Jessie didn't waste time. She shoved the doll back into the box, touching it as little as possible, and rushed to her car. The box shifted in the back seat the whole drive, jerking slightly, like something inside was still moving. At one point, she heard clicking noises coming from it, louder than her car's engine. Her grip on the steering wheel tightened. What was inside that thing? To calm her nerves, Jessie tried to focus on memory-sure childhood visits, the strange way her grandmother had guarded the doll. Was there something her grandmother had wanted to protect or hide? By the time she pulled into the police station parking lot, Jessie was more anxious than ever. She rushed inside, carrying the box, and asked to speak to the officer. Her panic was obvious. Several officers stepped toward her cautiously, but then one voice cut through. Officer Bill Baxter. He waved her through and led her to an interrogation room. Without delay, Baxter opened the box. The doll was lying eerily still now, but Jessie still kept her distance. "We'll cut it open," Baxter said calmly, pulling out a pair of scissors. Jessie stepped back, hands over her face, afraid of what he might find. "What if it's some kind of animal?" she whispered. But when Baxter sliced into the fabric and peered inside, he let out a surprised breath. "It's okay," he said gently. "Come take a look." Jessie approached slowly. Inside the doll's leg was a small, complex mechanical device, something that looked like it belonged in a sci-fi film, not a child's toy. It was moving, whirring faintly, with tiny gears and springs. "That's not a toy mechanism," Jessie said. "No," Baxter replied. He pointed to a faint red light blinking at the center of the mechanism. "That's a battery indicator. This thing isn't just mechanical, it's recording." Jessie's heart sank. Officer Baxter carefully detached the recorder and set it aside. Then, still inspecting the doll, he reached deeper inside and pulled out two more items, a small brass key and a folded note. The handwriting was instantly familiar. "Dear Jessie," the note began, "if you're reading this, it means my doll has reached you safely. Inside, you'll find two important things, a key and a recording device. Keep them safe. Do not show them to anyone in the family. Not all of them can be trusted." Jessie looked up, wide-eyed. She kept reading. "The device contains crucial information. Hand it to the authorities. It may save your life." Baxter, already scanning the recorder on his laptop, asked her more questions. Jessie read the final part of the note, a confession that her grandmother's brother had been threatening her for years, trying to get her inheritance. He'd even broken into her house. That was when she placed the recorder inside the doll, planning everything. And just as Jessie finished reading, the audio file began to play. The audio was rough, at first background noises, footsteps, furniture creaking, but soon voices emerged. Jessie's grandmother and her brother were arguing. The woman's voice was calm but firm, while the man's tone grew aggressive. "You know that money should have been split," the man hissed. "I was the one who took care of them. They wanted me to have it," the grandmother replied. "I won't let some brat walk away with everything," he barked. "I'll find it, one way or another." Jessie's hands trembled as she listened. The threats weren't vague, they were specific and frightening. Her grandmother's voice shook toward the end of the recording. "If anything happens to me, the doll will make sure the truth comes out." There was a loud bang, then silence, then more footsteps. Same man, alone, this time, muttering angrily. "Where is it? Where did she hide it?" "That must have been the break-in," Jessie whispered. Officer Baxter nodded grimly, adjusting the headphones and increasing the volume. The final section of the tape held an eerie calm. It was Jessie's grandmother again, speaking directly into the device. "Jessie, if you're hearing this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I couldn't explain all this in person, but I knew I had to protect you from him. The key, the vault, it's yours. Be careful." Jessie's throat tightened. Her grandmother's voice was gentle but purposeful. The woman had known something terrible was coming, and she prepared for it in the most elaborate, secretive way possible. The officer stood up. "That's more than enough to arrest him, and it's solid evidence. I'll handle it from here." "But the key," Jessie said, clutching the brass object tightly. Officer Baxter glanced at the note again. "It mentioned a vault, right?" Jessie nodded. "Then we need to find out what's inside." Within the hour, Jessie was standing inside, the town's largest bank. The key in her hand felt heavier now, like it carried the weight of generations. She approached the counter, nervous and unsure of what to say, but as soon as she mentioned her grandmother's name, the teller's expression changed. He nodded silently and asked her to follow. They passed through secured hallways and down into a private vault room. "This is yours," he said, stopping in front of a small, brass-plated door. "Your grandmother made arrangements for this." Jessie inserted the key. With a soft click, the door swung open. Her jaw dropped. Inside the vault was a leather briefcase stacked with neat bundles of cash. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more. There was also a small envelope with her name on it. She opened it slowly. "My sweet Jessie," the letter inside read, "this money is yours now. Use it to protect yourself, to build a future, to chase every dream you were afraid to follow. I'm sorry for all the secrets. I just needed to make sure it went to the right person." Tears welled up in Jessie's eyes. She returned home that evening, still stunned by everything that had happened. She placed the briefcase on the kitchen table, next to the now silent doll. The odd, creepy toy no longer felt threatening. It had done its job. It had protected her just as her grandmother had intended. Her phone rang. It was Officer Baxter. "We got him," he said. "He was furious, but he confessed everything. He's in custody now." A wave of relief washed over her. A month later, Jessie attended the court hearing. Her great-uncle was sentenced for burglary and intimidation. A restraining order was issued to ensure Jessie would never have to deal with him again. The inheritance, the secrets, the dollet had all come together like pieces in a long hidden puzzle, a puzzle her grandmother had crafted with love and care, even in the face of fear. Jessie looked down at the strange doll one last time, now cleaned up and sitting silently on a shelf in her living room. "You really were something else, Grandma," she whispered, smiling. But somewhere deep inside she wondered, was there anything else the doll hadn't yet revealed? The days that followed were a whirlwind for Jessie. Between dealing with paperwork for the inheritance and the aftermath of the arrest, she hardly had a moment to catch her breath. The story of the strange doll and the secret recording had spread through town like wildfire, making Jessie a temporary celebrity in her quiet neighborhood. People she hadn't spoken to in years suddenly showed up at her door, asking questions or offering congratulations, but Jessie kept her distance. She wasn't ready to share everything yet, not until she fully understood it herself. But the story wasn't quite finished. One evening, as Jessie sat in her living room sipping tea, her eyes landed on the doll again. It sat perfectly still on the bookshelf, staring out blankly. Despite everything, it still gave her the chills. She stood, walked over, and cautiously picked it up. She turned it over, examined the stitching, the faded button eyes, and the small tear on the seam that had been made by Officer Baxter during the inspection. Then something caught her attention just beneath the remaining stitches in the leg, a small bulge, a part of the lining that looked slightly different in texture and color. She hesitated, then grabbed a pair of sewing scissors. Slowly, carefully, Jessie cut through the seam again, just below where the officer had stopped. As the fabric parted, a small folded piece of cloth emerged inside it, a photo of her grandmother, much younger, standing with a man Jessie didn't recognize. Behind them was a building with a faded sign that read, "Bailey's Antiques." On the back of the photo, in her grandmother's elegant cursive, were the words, "The truth starts here. If you're ready." Jessie's heart pounded. She flipped the photo back and forth, confused. Bailey's Antiques? The name sounded vaguely familiar. She pulled out her phone and searched for it. To her surprise, the store was still open barely. Located just outside of town, it had long been a relic of the past, operating only by appointment. Jessie didn't know what she expected to find there, but one thing was clear. Her grandmother hadn't just left her money. She had left her a trail. The next morning, Jessie made the trip. The shop was quiet, almost forgotten. A rusted bell jingled as she opened the door. The air was thick with dust and the smell of aged wood. Behind the counter stood an elderly man with a deeply lined face and a glint of recognition in his eyes. "You must be Jessie," he said before she could. "Speak." Startled, Jessie nodded. "How did you?" "Your grandmother said you might come," he interrupted. "Told me to wait, and when you did, to give you this." He reached beneath the counter and pulled out a small velvet box. Jessie opened it slowly. Inside was a golden locket and another note. "Inside this locket is a hidden code. Use it with the key. There's one more vault, Jessie, one that holds the full story." Goosebumps prickled Jessie's skin. What had her grandmother been involved in? What was this full story? She thanked the man and left in a daze. Once home, Jessie examined the locket. It had a delicate Ingravinga flower pattern she remembered from her grandmother's favorite china set, but inside was more than just a picture. A tiny, folded piece of parchment had been carefully tucked beneath the photo. It wasn't a note. It was a series of numbers and letters. BX 771, a 12. She stared at it, puzzled. It looked like a code of some kind, but to what? Her mind raced. Was this related to the bank, or something else entirely? She remembered the bank clerk's reaction, the way he didn't ask questions when she mentioned her grandmother. Maybe, just maybe, there was more behind that behavior. She called Officer Baxter. "I need your help," she said. "There's something else." He met her at her house that evening. Together, they examined the code, the locket, and the remaining contents of the doll's box. Baxter's eyes narrowed. "This format looks familiar. Governmental. Possibly Federal Registry or storage." "Like a vault?" Jessie asked. He nodded slowly. "Or a safety deposit, one that isn't with a commercial bank." He made a few calls. A few hours later, they had their lead, a storage facility tied to a private archive used by former intelligence workers and antique dealers that Jessie's grandmother had apparently registered access to nearly 2 decades ago. The plot was getting deeper. The next day, they visited the archive together. Jessie handed over the code. After some verification and an identity check, the clerk returned and handed her a sleek, metallic casino larger than a laptop. Inside, stacks of documents, old letters, photos, and most disturbing of all tapes. Baxter and Jessie stared in silence as they realized what this was. Evidence. Years of it. Apparently, Jessie's grandmother had been investigating illegal financial operations involving her brother and several other people in town. It was bigger than just a family squabble. There were records of fraud, property seizures, even blackmail, and it was all recorded. Jessie's grandmother hadn't just protected her inheritance, she had built a case. Slowly, secretly, and the doll, that creepy, mysterious doll, had been her decoy, her carrier. By the end of the week, the local authorities had reopened several investigations. The grandmother's brother was facing more charges than anyone initially expected, and a few other names began to surface. People Jessie knew, people she once trusted. The truth had been hidden in plain sight, and thanks to one brave woman and her oddly terrifying doll, it finally came out.